A ver ahí. Waiting for Sofía.
Hola.
Finally. Lo logramos.
Lo logramos.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Yeah. Okay, we made it. So hi everybody. Thank you for joining us. We are here with Sofía Gallisá Muriente today. Well, Sofía is an amazing artist and activist and friend. She is from Puerto Rico. So maybe you read some of her information if you got our email, which you can subscribe to get with all these talks that we're doing. We're also like posting some information in our Instagram. But something interesting that we discussed with Sofía planning for today was to, not only talk about her previous practice and try to replicate this idea of the studio visit in which she would tell, about the things that she's been doing, but also, as she stated in the bio that she sent, I think something very interesting about what she sent for her biography is that she sent, she recently, she has all her information. This is in our website. And you'll see that, the COVID outbreak has indefinitely postponed her upcoming Smithsonian Artist Fellowship, an exhibition at TEA in Tenerife, and a commission with fellow Puerto Rican artist Natalia Lastache for an exhibition at the USF Contemporary Art Museum. So Sofía came with this proposal, which I thought was very interesting to also talk about these projects, not just about what she did in the past, but also about the projects that she was planning to do and share those with us, which I think is amazing. Let us think about future, but also, accept the things that cannot be done. So I don't know if you want.
So I forgot on that list, which is what happened the weekend down started. Exhibition at the west coast side of the island, which is a really theater, but also musicians do a residency there, and I was supposed to kind of some of the results of that work in January, but we had an earthquake swarm that closed down the space, and that created another emergency situation here 2 months ago. And then it was postponed to March, and it coincided with the lockdown. So it's been doubly postponed. But I wanted to share some of that process because to me, it's a result of things that I have been thinking about in the past 2.5 years, more or less, mainly after Hurricane Maria, which was obviously a very transformative and impactful event in our history, in our recent history, and similar to this moment now, the kind of life-changing events that make you think about, how can I think about this through my artistic practice? How can my artistic practice help me process this in some way and think about what is happening right now. And how can my practice respond to what is happening here in Puerto Rico? And so one thing that I started thinking a lot about and working on was the idea of the relationship between climate and memory, especially in the tropics, how different processes of biodeterioration are constantly eating up the material evidence of history in different ways, both in, you see it everywhere from abandoned structures to under-researched archives, or you see it even where I live, the presence of salt in the air is visible all the time in how it corrodes metal. The humidity creates mold that, it's constantly giving me allergies. So I know it's this invisible force that is everywhere because my body reacts to it, right? And I was really interested in how to make those invisible forces more visible, especially because they became so visible with the storm. And so I started researching a lot, different ideas around biodeterioration, but also connecting it to just the idea of impermanence. And one thing that really blew my mind is in the process, I was reading a lot about salt. Actually, just to take a step back, I reached out to Catherine Ramey, who is an American experimental filmmaker who has been working here in the past couple of years, and we've collaborated in the past. And Catherine is an experimental filmmaker who teaches in Boston, who has written a lot about experimental film techniques. And so I reached out to her and I told her I want to somehow make humidity visible on film, or play with, generating molds on the film, or using this expired 60 millimeter film stock that I had in my freezer that I had been preserving, but then with the hurricane and the blackout that followed for weeks, it started also rotting, disintegrating, it gets kind of like acidic. And I was like, I want to make all of these processes visible. And one thing that Catherine told me was, well, the first thing that you need to understand is that, black and white film responds to salt because it's, the base is silver. So it really responds to salt, but color film responds, because it has an organic base, it responds to mold and humidity, And so I produced a piece in 2018, which was the first work that I did after the hurricane, which is called Assimilate and Destroy, Asimilar y Destruir. And the name came from reading about salt. I was reading about the history of salt production in Puerto Rico and how it was basically the first industry ever created in like 1502. Ponce de Leon was given 20 Taino Indians and told, you can go, start a commercial salt production. But also reading about just the chemistry of salt. Salt is amazing, it has all these crazy properties. It kind of are contradictory, and one of the things that it does, it facilitated colonization because it made people be able to travel further by sea because you can preserve food. All of these things, right? It's tied to all of these histories. But one thing that I love about it that really blew my mind is that chemically, when the salt is eating, for example, the film, the celluloid, it does two things at the same time. It breaks apart, it destroys the bigger molecules and turns them into smaller molecules, and it assimilates those molecules, right? So it assimilates and destroys at the same time. And the idea that those could be things that happen simultaneously, that in order for things to become digestible, in order for us to be able to assimilate a political process or a reality, something around it, we had to destroy it. To me, it just became something that I really wanted to think about for a while, and in one way or another, it's a series of works that I've been developing since 2018 until recently in this residency at Casa Cruz de la Luna. And the first work that I made, I can show you a little bit on my computer.
That would be great, yeah.
The first piece that I developed was taking, I took this black and white film in 60 millimeter that I had shot in an ice skating rink in Aguadilla in Puerto Rico. And I exposed it to salt from the salt fields of Cabo Rojo, and in the southwest corner of the island. And basically, I let the salt create crystals on the film, and then I rephotographed it digitally using a little setup that I'll show you later. But basically, putting it on a light box and making photographs of it frame by frame, and then basically animating those photographs. And that was, yeah. What were you gonna say?
No. It's just a comment for those that might be watching us that might not know more about your work. I strongly encourage everybody to look for Sofia's work. I mean, because these lives are only 1 hour long, and because people, you'll have plenty of opportunities to learn about her work, and hopefully you'll Google more. but just a comment. I mean, she's been working about like this like tension in between climate for a long time. I mean, let's say famous video that she made. It's a whole research about this archival documents that she found about this time in the 1950s where snow was brought to Puerto Rico as a celebration of Puerto Rico becoming part of the United States. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, this like absurd like situation in which basically they brought like a whole plane with a bunch of snow.
It was to celebrate Three Kings Day, actually.
Yeah, Three Kings Day.
Yeah, a couple of years in a row to celebrate Three Kings Day. Yeah, as like a public Christmas celebration.
And she got this amazing piece, like basically appropriating and using this footage. But I mean, what I wanted to say about this is that she's been for a long time like working with this you know, this work with the archives and what archives can show us about the past, but also about the present, and specifically about like issues of climate, which seem like especially relevant for somebody coming from Puerto Rico. I wanted to ask you maybe a philosophical question, which might sound a little bit like mystical, but I feel like we're in such strange times. But what does it feel to be Puerto Rican after all you guys been through, climate-wise, politically-wise, and now we are in the apex of like these like vortex of like nature political disaster? Like, I mean, do you feel like a very powerful like told you so world or something like that, or like I don't know?
Told you so. It would be terrible, you know, considering how difficult
I know.
it's
difficult for everybody.
But
I feel we deserve it. I mean.
But I definitely feel like to some degree it's crazy to see the United States having like their Maria moment, right? And I spent like a year doing volunteer relief work in Rockaway after Sandy. Like I had already in 2012 a really intense, like heartbreaking experience of seeing how, you know, even white Americans that live as you know next to a subway line, where on a place where you can see the Empire State Building from that, even those people can be like totally like dismissed by their government and like left to die under, you know, horrible circumstances. So it's not an entirely foreign concept to me, but it is really shocking the scale at which this is happening, and so many things remind us of Maria being in Puerto Rico. You know, so much of it is like, you know, and for that same reason, like somehow, I'm not gonna say we're all coping here and like dealing with it, but I think there's definitely like it feels like we've spent the couple past years like preparing and training and like having to figure out ways of living within disaster, you know, and so it's kind of crazy to now see certain things manifest themselves in like the US version, you know, and like how will these same things unfold when it's in the US and when it's in a much larger scale. And it's been interesting. I'm happy that I'm here also. Like suddenly this is suddenly one of the crazy things that it has that speaks to, you know, like the historical political moment that we're in, is that suddenly the big urban centers are hit harder, right? Are hit hardest, you know? And suddenly being outside the center is like safer in a way, you know?
Anyway, sorry.
Anyways, I wanted to show you the second part to that video.
Please do.
Which I recently made. This is the video. This is one of the videos that I made while in residency at Casa Cruz de la Luna. And this is kind of like the second part to the video that I just showed before. This is a color film, and it's of me and my grandmother. It's a bit longer, so it takes a little bit to get to the part of the image. But it's a color film of me and my grandmother going to the beach near her home in Levittown. Levittown is the first planned community in Puerto Rico, and it was in its moment, obviously seen and sold as a model of modern middle class life, and she moved there in the 60s when it was very young, very new. Sorry, the project, the housing development was very new, and was, filling up with people also kind of coming back from the war or coming back from living and working in New York, where a lot of Puerto Ricans had migrated. And I've been looking at the history of Levittown and the history of my grandmother's life for a long time. I've been really interested in how they kind of how her life kind of mirrors and crosses through a lot of pivotal moments in the history of Puerto Rico in the 20th century. How her life kind of mirrors that narrative arc, and just documenting different spaces connected to her life, and trying to kind of mix in this work, kind of like a very intimate approach to her history and her spaces, with also like a larger with that larger context of looking at the history of Levittown and the history of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico and our Constitution, and that kind of project that was built here in 52 to kind of camouflage, us being a colony by creating a notion of ourselves as a Commonwealth. And so this is, the Assimilate and Destroyed Part 2, and it's a similar experiment as the first one. In this case, I took the film that I had shot once it was developed, and I hung it in her backyard. I put fruit from her backyard all over it. I let it be there in the rain and in the wind. The mold wasn't really growing fast enough, so eventually I buried it in the backyard in milk crates. I put the film in dirt with leaves and fruit and all sorts of things that I found in the backyard, and I allowed for the mold to grow on the film, and then again I rephotographed it frame by frame. I'm gonna show you just a little bit of how I did that, because I know it's a little abstract. This is basically the setup that I use, which is a light bulb,
nice.
A couple of magnifying glasses, a little glass on top, and some tape to kind of guide the film through the middle, and then a camera with a tripod and a long lens on top of it. It's not a perfect system by any chance, by any measure, but it's worked out for those two films. It's also I never expected I would turn into one of those really meticulous, artisanal, weirdo, experimental filmmakers. I always had a lot of respect for those people, but I never thought I had the patience. And I think it was until Maria happened and time was different, and you didn't seem to have enough quiet time or alone time to kind of drift away in some way that I suddenly it really fit, it made sense to me suddenly to work in that way, or it just kind of happened. And this is the photo that you guys used for the promo, but just to explain it, this is me in my grandmother's backyard hanging the film. There's another image of that. And then this is one of the films that I've shot in Levittown. This is just from a test roll, but this is an old film that had been rotting in my house since the hurricane, since it didn't have power. And so I've been kind of playing with that film and still working with some of it. Also filming, this is obviously just a digital image, but also filming sites like this in her neighborhood, which is like, you know, some like a bizarre Spanish colonial monument. But just kind of filming spaces around there, and then filming spaces in other parts of Puerto Rico where I feel like that are particularly poignant sites. This is a coal plant in the southern part of the island that has been a site of a lot of protests, and right in front of this coal plant, unfortunately I don't have an image of it, but right in front of this coal plant there's a giant field with solar panels that was subsidized by the government to run the coal plant. So it's a coal plant that runs on solar energy, and there's like a whole what do you call that? Rebaño. ¿Cómo se dice rebaño? A flock of sheep.
Rebaño, like a cow herd.
Yeah, like a herd of sheep that hang out in between the solar panels to mow the lawn.
Nice.
So yeah, so
flock.
You know,
somebody's telling us online, like flock. It's called a flock.
Thank you, Yarima. So, you know, I'm just saying, I know this seems all a little scattered, but what I'm
no, that actually reminds me, you know, I feel like so much of your work has to do with this like sense of apocalyptic nature taking over, fantasy that people have. But I don't know if you've seen the memes that people have been sharing of like nature, like that whole like ridiculous like fake news of like the dolphins going back to Venice, you know, like there was never, the orcas going back to Venice channels, you know, like but in your case it was real.
Yeah, well, that's the crazy part, right? Yeah. All our craziest, you know, fantasies about what could happen have turned out to be true, or reality has totally surpassed them, you know. Oh, I had something else here that I wanted to show you in regards to, you know, materials that I've been collecting from my grandmother. I had been working with my grandmother, like in collaboration with her very much since like 2007, or no, actually since 2005. But as I was working on this recent project, she actually passed away. So suddenly the process of cleaning her house and going to see the film in the backyard as it was accumulating mold and all of these things were suddenly tied to like a process of grief, you know. It became sort of like a ritual too, and like a whole process of discovering little objects and things that could eventually become materials in my work, you know. And I, you know, so I've been collecting a lot of things, and I'm moving right now, so I've been finding also a lot of these things in my house. So I wanted to share these two things. One is my grandmother was an English teacher, and so she had all sorts of like 50s and 60s teaching materials, and these are like
wow,
beautiful vocabulary